Okay, this subunit is going to be on land management and planning. So here's a picture of Falling Waters. It's an architectural marvel made by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was made to essentially blend in with the environment and kind of have the least impact on the environment as possible. So we'll get back to that. The objectives of this lesson are going to be to describe differences in use of public land and private land, describe large-scale land management methods implemented by governments and corporations, and to determine possible impacts of land management methods on the environment. So let's get into public land usage. So public lands can be managed at the federal or the state level. We've got two different distinguishers, protected and unprotected. So protected are going to be kind of what we talked about previously, like wilderness areas, national and state parks. And unprotected are going to be any public land existing outside of the protective borders, so like outside of wilderness areas or national or state parks. So let's get into federal and state parks a little bit. Federal parks are going to be the same thing as national parks. So an example is Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, the Everglades. Yellowstone was the first national park created ever, like throughout the whole world. The rest of the world kind of picked up on this and started creating their own national parks, which is awesome. And Yellowstone's has a monument, and it says it's for the benefit and enjoyment of the people, which is awesome. We also have state parks. A good example of that is going to be Cheyenne Mountain State Park. That's here in El Paso County. Anybody can go there if they have a state park pass. It's very cheap, or you can pay $5, I believe, to get in. So things that we use public land for that are unprotected are things like transportation. So trains, buses, airports, subways, roads, all that stuff is public land. It's being used for different reasons, though. So public land can be used by private organizations for like grazing, mining, oil extraction, all sorts of things, transportation, just industry. So here's a good example of roads. This is on public land here, but everybody uses it, so it's kind of beneficial to all. Let's get into private land usage a little bit. So private land is going to be essentially like residences and commercial buildings. So residences are like apartments, houses, duplexes, places that people live. And then commercial is going to be like businesses, factories, industrial sites, oil mining, grazing, all that stuff. Those are also private lands as well. So private companies can buy up public lands and turn those into private lands. A really good example, like I was talking about earlier, of private land is Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. This is just like an awesome architectural achievement. He built this house basically in a waterfall, and this area becomes inundated with water, but it doesn't destroy the foundation. It kind of just blends in with nature. It's a really awesome place. But this is private land that ended up becoming public land. So that's something that can happen. Public land can become private land, and private land can become public land. This just happens to be like a really awesome thing, and so they created a monument. So let's talk about some land management methods. The government is involved in a lot of land management through zoning and regulations. So zoning is going to be like commercial, residential, agricultural, industrial, manufacturing, timber, mining, etc. There are zoning restrictions on all of these types of things. So why I talked about this is because you can't really make a sprout up gold mine in your backyard if you find gold back there. It's going to negatively impact the homes in your area and the businesses in your area. So zoning restrictions tend to have the stipulation that it can't negatively impact homes or businesses in the area. So that's something you have to think about. So let's get into pollution prevention a little bit. We have the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and we previously had the Clean Power Plan. That was disbanded about 2 weeks ago because we're kind of going back to coal interests, and the Clean Power Plan doesn't really align with the new administration's coal plans. So they got rid of this, but it was a really good thing trying to curb emissions. And then a corporate example of pollution prevention is going to be like capitalism is kind of the society we live in, and capitalism is 100% consumer driven. So with more awareness about pollution and clean energy, the people have started to drive the market towards green practices. So a good example of that is going to be like Tesla. That company has shot up in the past 10 years. Solar energy growth, wind energy, wave energy, all the renewable energies, that sector has grown, and it's actually a really profitable market, because essentially once you're done paying for all of the like building materials, you're just getting free energy, and so that money goes back into the system very quickly. Europe has already made back all their money from green energy renewal practices, and for some reason we're going away from that, but we the people can make a change. So here is just a nice little graphic of the Clean Air Act. Here's a bunch of things that it's done. You can go ahead and pause, take a look at this, see what kind of things that the Clean Air Act has done. And then here's just a picture of the EPA's model for number of impaired waterways by state. So if you can see here, almost every state has more than 100 impaired waterways. The only exceptions are Arizona and Alaska. Alaska because there's not too many people there and they're really about their natural resources. And Arizona because there's pretty much no water. There aren't very many waterways there. Okay, so here's just a really good little infograph about Tesla and their competition, Porsche. So this is Tesla right when they kind of started getting into the market. They didn't make a lot of money, but they're projected by about 2020 to be making this much per year in, I think, millions of dollars. So this is a whole lot of money here, and they're going to outperform Porsche very quickly. Porsche just kind of has like a linear model. They're not really going towards too many green energy practices. They do have hybrids and more clean, fuel-efficient cars, but Tesla's like all electric. So they make a lot of money doing that. They do other things as well. And then here is a really good graph of installed capacity for megawatts of like solar panels, and then yeah, I think this is just solar panels here. So we've had 100 times growth in 13 years for solar panels, and the main one is going to be Europe down here. It's that blue bar. Europe has really gone towards renewable energy, and they're seeing a profit in their economy. China is going to start getting into it as well. They have the largest solar panels, or they're planning to have the most solar panels in the earth. I think India right now has the most. And then here is just a good graph of solar panel prices going down with solar panel installations. So with more people wanting solar panel installations, the price of that is going to drop. So the market is going to go towards the green energy. So there's not really any reason to be going towards coal other than the really small communities that still try and subsist on coal mining, which it's kind of an outdated thing. We need to start thinking about new ways to create energy. So, got a blank slide there. We've got some environmental management systems that we'll talk about here. And then I think that's the last slide, yeah. Okay, so the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation is a thing that started up. Essentially, it's just a commission that looks after companies and their environmental actions and how they kind of change the environment due to pollution or all sorts of things. We have currently 15,000 companies voluntarily complying with the ISO 14001, and that's just like the legislation behind this. So we have a lot of companies complying with it, and they're doing it voluntarily because the market is being driven towards that, being more environmentally friendly and green. So we've got an example of the need for compliance, and that's going to be London's killer fog of 1952. So after the World War II, they didn't have many resources. London, pretty much all of Europe, but London specifically didn't have many resources, so they used dirty coal. This is just coal that hasn't been refined enough to be able to produce like less emissions when it's burned. So the air became very smoggy and polluted, and toxic fumes built up in the air close to the land because of certain atmospheric conditions. So there was heavy air pushing that stuff down, and it stayed right next to the land. And what happened was thousands of people died. And this was completely avoidable. Like, they did not need to do that. They, it was 1952, so they didn't really know all that much, but it was completely avoidable. All of those people died for essentially no reason. They were just using really bad energy, and that's coal. And then here's just a picture of that 1952 killer smog. You can see it was everywhere. This is an artistic depiction, but we have actual pictures of this, and this is what it looked like. So just imagine walking around in this every day and breathing all that stuff in. Okay, so that is the end of that lesson. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and let me know. Otherwise, have a wonderful week.